welcome everybody. So I have a couple exciting announcements. First of all, I am sporting the newest Texie boot called Fly Girl, boots with a sole, hot pink, compliments of my child. And then secondly, the website editor from ShayCaffey.com, due to a request from some of the watchers online, has now put all the teachings from Revelation 1 through at least 11, I don't know if he's got Dead in Christ up yet, on audio. So for those of you that are tech savvy and want to listen to them via podcast, or you can download them on your favorite devices, you can listen to them now anywhere you go. So that's exciting for some people. Anyway, so I'm going to dive into Revelation 12 tonight. So where we were last week, how many of you watched or were here for the Dead in Christ are revealed? Raise your hands. Okay. Keep your hands up if you learned something that you didn't know. Okay, pretty much lots of hands are still up. The people that went through the class before are like, oh, old hat, we knew all that. Okay, that is one of the teachings that I said gets the most feedback. And I've had no negative feedback thus far. There are some people that are like still trying to process everything. It's a lot of information. I'm going to do the same thing to you tonight. I'm going to give you a lot of information. So you can go on the website and rewatch any of these. Hit pause, take a moment, process. But when we ended chapter 11, the seventh trumpet technically had blown. So what we have done thus far in this series is we've finished 2 timelines. We finished the seals timeline, and we finished the trumpets timeline. And what you have to understand is these 2 timelines run parallel to each other. And they're both 3.5 years long. They both end with the same event, which is the return of Christ. When the 7th seal opens, there is silence in heaven for the span of a half an hour. When the 7th trumpet blows, Christ and everyone in heaven with him returns in the clouds for the bride. Thus, the silence in heaven. So that's where we ended chapter 11. And then I did the Dead in Christ are revealed sub-teaching. So chapter 12 is going to take us back to the beginning of this timeline. Because we've already done it, now we're just going to go back in every week from here on and fill in the blanks. More puzzle pieces to this 3.5 years. So I will tell you each week where we are in the timeline, so that when we're adding these pieces together, you guys can kind of picture this. 3.5 years is all we're trying to keep track of right now. Chapter 12, when I started doing this teaching, and I would read the chapter first in King James all the way through, and I would say to myself, I'm never going to get this. I'm never going to understand this. And then I would begin to amplify one word at a time, one verse at a time. By the end of it, I'm like, oh, I get it. But when I read 12, I'm like, I am not going to get this. Like, this is the craziest chapter. What you have to understand is it's broken into 2 sections. The top section is about the dragon and the woman. The bottom section is about the beast and the woman. And if you understand that the first section that's about the dragon and the woman is history, it's already historic prophecy, it's already been fulfilled. The second half that's about the the beast and the woman is the end times. It's future prophecy that has not been fulfilled yet. And if you can wrap your brain around, these are 2 separate events and 2 eras of time, chapter 12 will make sense. So we're going to start with historic prophecy fulfilled, Revelation 12, verses 1 through 2, and this is amplified Greek. For those watching, if you don't know what that means, you need to hit pause and go back to chapter 1 and get caught up. All right, amplified Greek. And there appeared a marvelous sign in the second heaven, or the heaven of the stars. A woman, and in parentheses in your notes, for those watching online, hit pause, print your notes out. You're going to need them tonight. I've put in the parentheses what the word meant amplified. So because I wanted in this chapter for you to see the original words, the symbols, and then what the symbols amplified are. So I've done this chapter a little differently for you. So, and there appeared a marvelous sign in the second heaven, or the heaven of the stars. A woman, Israel, appeared surrounded in rays of sunlight, which symbolizes her supreme authority. She had the brightness of the moon underneath her feet, symbolizing her derived earthly authority. And upon her head was a diadem of 12 stars, which marked her exalted rank. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth, a symbol of Christ coming from the bloodline of Israel. So here's John. He's seeing a vision of the second heaven, so now we know he's seeing the atmospheric region of like the planets, where the sun, moon, and stars are, and he sees a pregnant woman with 12 stars around her head, and it's all symbolic of the history of Israel. There's a few women that are mentioned in Revelation. There's a woman in chapter 2 that deceives the church of Thyatira. They called her the Jezebel. There's this woman that's pregnant. It's about ready to give birth in the sky in his vision. There is a woman later in this chapter that runs from Satan in the flood. And then there's a woman later that rides a scarlet beast. Now, all of these women symbolize different things, and we're going to tell you what each of them symbolize. The pregnant woman seen here, like I just said, it symbolizes Israel. She's been chosen by God long ago, which gives her supreme heavenly authority and earthly authority. She's God, they're God's chosen people. The crown of the 12 stars is the 12 tribes of Israel. So this is Israel and Israel's history. Revelation 12, 3-6. And there appeared another sign in the starry heavens. I saw a great red dragon, Satan, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. And his tail drew a third part of the stars, which is the angels. We know that metaphors for stars are angels, and they are in this verse. He drew a third part of the stars of the starry heaven and forcibly cast them to the earth. And the dragon, Satan, stood before the woman, Israel, which was ready to deliver her seed, Jesus. And so he, Satan, could devour her child, Jesus, as soon as he was born. Verse 5. And the woman, Israel, brought forth a male child, Jesus, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, a kingly scepter. And Israel's seed, Jesus, was divinely and marvelously transferred from earth to the highest heaven. That's his resurrection and his ascension, where God abides and rules, which is the third heaven, or the heavenly temple. And the woman, now it switches to Christians that are in Israel, sought safety and fled into the desert wilderness, and we're going to teach you later that that is Pella in the surrounding areas. We're going to go into that because this is all past history. Where God in his will and direction prepared a place where she could settle down and dwell. And he nourished, supported, and fed her there for 1,260 days, which is 3.5 years. This is all historic prophecy that can be read about in Josephus and history books and online. It is called the Great Revolt, or the Jewish-Roman War. Started in 66 AD, ended in 70 AD. It's a 3.5-year war. So what we have here is just the history of Israel, Satan being cast out of heaven. Now we know Satan originally fell before Adam and Eve, and I'm going to read that to you. That comes in Isaiah 14, 12-15. And it says, this is King James Version, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, and I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit." So even though Satan and his fallen angels, and that is the only verse where it talks about a third of the angels being cast out, is Revelation 12:4, and it calls them stars. So a lot of people are like, where is that in the Bible where a third of the angels fell? Revelation 12:4. But Satan no longer has kind of residency in heaven. He can't live there. He doesn't have his position there. He has no authority there. But according to the Bible, he still has access to the throne room for the purpose of accusing us. He can go back and forth between earth and heaven. Just read the book of Job. In Job 1, 6 and 7, this is New International Version. It says, one day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. And the Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? And Satan answered the Lord, from roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it. Satan still has access to the throne room of heaven for the purpose of accusing us. He can't live there. He can't have power and authority there, but he can accuse us. And so he can go back and forth. It's limited, and I think he has to answer for his activities, but he has access to the throne room. So things are about to change because history is going to repeat itself. And we're going to see Satan getting evicted from the throne room for good. And so that is what we're going to get into in the second half of chapter 12. There's a lot of times in history where history seems to repeat itself. A lot of details are very similar, but it's not the same event. It's just similar events that are like, man, that's a whole lot like that. That's chapter 12. The first half and the second half, if you didn't know any better, you think he was just repeating the same story twice. First half, verses 1 through 6, is history already fulfilled. Past. It was fulfilled in 70 AD when Jerusalem finally fell to the Romans and the temple was burned and Jerusalem was destroyed. Then we jump into the second half of chapter 12. It's future prophecy. Hasn't happened yet. So when you understand that, chapter 12 makes so much more sense. So in chapter 12, verses 1 through 6, this is the history I've been telling you about. It shows how Satan hated Israel. He was cast out of heaven. He took a third of the angels with him. He hates Israel's favor with God. So he tried to have Jesus killed. The pregnant woman, he's the dragon waiting for the pregnant woman to have the baby so he can devour it. The decree by Herod the Great to have all male babies killed that were 2 and under was an attempt to kill Jesus. But he didn't get killed. He was born. And he fulfilled his ministry. And then in 30 AD in the spring, he was crucified and he marvelously and divinely ascended. So that's what chapter 12, 1 through 6 is talking about. It's just the history of Satan, Israel, and Jesus being from the bloodline of Israel. Does that make sense? Okay, so Jesus is killed and crucified in 30 AD in the spring. 36 years later, 66 AD in the spring, Emperor Nero sent Vespasian, his most decorated general, down into Jerusalem to get the Judeans under control because they were bucking the system. They didn't want to pay their temple taxes anymore because the Romans were taking their temple tax that was supposed to go to keeping up the temple and taking it back to Rome. And so they were revolting. And so Vespasian's job is to come down and basically put the Judeans under Roman rule better than they were. They weren't behaving. Well, meanwhile, a governor of Syria named Cestius Gallus started to head down with his troops. And he arrived in Jerusalem first. And he actually surrounded the city. But then he pulled back for some reason. And it says that the Christians heeded the warning that Jesus had given them 36 years earlier when he was talking to the disciples about not one stone will be left on another, and they thought, this is it. They left. They fled Jerusalem, and they went into Pella, which is in Syria. And history has it that for the 3.5 years that when the Romans came down and surrounded Jerusalem and starved the people, and if you read about the Jewish-Roman War, it was horrific what they did to the people. They wouldn't let them out. If people tried to escape, they'd crucify them and hang them on crosses outside the city. And they would catapult dead bodies back into the city. So there's just decay. It was horrible. For 3.5 years, not one Christian perished. But over 1 million Jews died. And at the end of it, when they finally lost the battle to the Romans, 98,000 Jewish people were imprisoned. Not one Christian was killed. So Jesus, because of a warning that he gave them, the Christians lived, and they didn't die in that. In Matthew 23, this is 35 and 36, this is King James Version, it says, here's Jesus talking to them. He's talking actually to the Pharisees because they've shut the kingdom of heaven up and they've made it impossible for the word of God to be spread. They're killing off all the prophets. And so here's Jesus talking to them, and he says that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed upon the earth, from the blood of righteous Abel unto the blood of Zacharias, son of Barachias, whom ye slew between the temple and the altar. Verily I say unto you, all these things shall come upon this generation. And when you look up the word generation in that verse, it's the Greek word is gune, and it says used especially of the Jewish race living at one and the same period. So he was talking in a Jewish race, and the Bible is about 40 years. So he's literally talking to these scribes and these Pharisees that have killed the prophets. Upon you is going to come their blood, and it's going to happen in your generation. That was 30 AD. 40 years later, 70 AD, Jerusalem fell. Exactly one generation. So Jesus prophesied of this upcoming battle, and that's why the Christians fled. They didn't stick around. He saved their lives through a warning to the Pharisees. And I think that's pretty cool. So I've got 4 historic accounts from different sources that talk about the Christians' escape. It says, the whole body, however, of the church of Jerusalem, having been commanded by a divine revelation given to men of approved piety there before the war, removed from the city and dwelt in a certain town beyond the Jordan called Pella. Second account. Epiphanes also attested to the Christian escape. According to the Bible scholar Adam Clarke, the latter wrote, "It is very remarkable that not a single Christian perished in the destruction of Jerusalem, though there were many there when Cestius Gallus invested the city. And had he persevered in the siege, he would have rendered himself master of it. But when he unexpectedly and unaccountably raised the siege, the Christians took that opportunity to escape." Third account. As Vespasian was approaching with his army, all who believed in Christ left Jerusalem and fled to Pella and other places beyond the Jordan River. And so they all marvelously escaped the general shipwreck of their country. Not one of them perished. Not one. A fourth account. Pella must not have been the only destination of fleeing Christians, but it was the most prominent at the time. The flight to Pella took place in AD 66 during the attack of Gallus, Cestius Gallus. So the attack went from the spring of 66 to the fall of 70. That's 3.5 years. Ironically, but not ironically, the tribulation is going to span the same period of time. 3.5 years, and it's going to end with the destruction of Jerusalem. And it's going to start with a very similar event that was talked about in the first part of chapter 12. That's why people get so confused and think he's just talking about the same thing twice. He's not. 2 separate events. History is about to repeat itself in the future. So now we're going to get into Satan's eviction from the throne room. Chapter 12, verses 7 through 9, Amplified Greek. And there, future prophecy, and there appeared a battle in the highest heaven. Okay, this one's not in the second heaven this time. First one was in the second heaven. This one is in the throne room. There appeared a battle in the highest heaven, the dwelling place of God and the angels. Michael, the archangel, and his good angels fought against Satan, the dragon, and his fallen, past tense, his fallen angels. And they were overcome and defeated. There was no longer any place found for them in heaven. The great dragon was forcibly smitten, battled against, and cast out. The ancient serpent who deceived Eve. Past tense. That's already happened. This is a different kicking out, a different battle. The ancient serpent who deceived Eve, called the devil and Satan, who leads all mankind away from the truth. He was cast out unto the earth along with his angels, who proved faithless to the trust committed to them by God, and who now obey the devil. They were all cast out. So this battle, like I said, is not the same kicking out that happened before Adam and Eve. He still has access to the throne room, but not after this battle will take place. And I believe that when he is evicted from the throne room for good, it will be the trigger point to the 3.5-year Great Tribulation. Now, we're not going to see that battle. It's going to happen where we won't see it. But there are after effects from that battle when he gets cast to the earth that we will definitely see. So we are going to know when we're in it based on what he does after he gets evicted, because he does something very specific that is identifiable. The first time God kicked him out. The second time, Archangel Michael and the good angels are going to kick him out. So 2 completely different battles. So when John went up into the throne room in chapter 4 and 5, did he see Satan milling around with a bunch of his angels? So in my brain, I'm like, okay, so we obviously know that when John got a vision of the throne room. It was post-eviction because he didn't say Satan was up there. He described good angels. He described the 4 living creatures. They were good. They were worshiping God. He described the 24 elders himself, God on the throne. He didn't say, and Satan was up there milling around with them. So his vision is right before the tribulation starts, after Satan has been evicted. And then I get to thinking, okay, how cool is that? Because when John went up there, he didn't see the church. He didn't see a bunch of Christians up there playing harps and worshiping God on the sea of glass. Would be a little awkward if Satan's up there milling around accusing people to try to be worshiping God. There's nobody up there. But Satan has to be evicted, because what's going to happen when the tribulation starts is that throne room is going to start filling up with martyrs. And Satan can't be up there when they start to show up. So he is going to be booted out first. Does that make sense? Seeing lots of yeses out there? Yes, it makes complete sense. All right, Revelation. So the second part of chapter 12, future prophecy. This is the eviction of Satan. 12 verse 10, Amplified Greek. And I heard a loud voice saying in the heavens, now at this moment is come future salvation. Now is come the kingly power and the dignity of God and the power and the authority of Christ. For the false accuser of our brethren has been violently displaced from his position, who accuses believers while standing in the presence of God day and night. He's been evicted. He's not allowed to do that ever again. When this happens, he's going to be infuriated, and he's going to go after the woman again, just like he did the first time. He went after the woman, Israel, and then he went after the Christians, but they fled, and he couldn't have them. But he had Israel, he got the Jews, over 1 million of them were killed. History's going to repeat itself. So what the devil does when he gets cast to earth, the first thing he does is he gives his power to the 2 anti-Christian rulers of the end times, called the Antichrist and the false prophet. And between this unholy trinity, they're going to kill the 144,000 witnesses, and they're going to enforce a lot of rules in Israel and the Middle East when they do that. But these 144,000, we've talked about them, and they get brought up all the way through the tribulation. They already know that their job is to witness, and they're going to lay down their lives. And their hope is not in anything but their future salvation. And even though they die in the tribulation, God considers them overcomers. They're called overcomers because they were willing to lay down their lives for him. So when we get into Revelation 12, 11 through 14, you're going to come across such a huge, popular verse that everybody quotes, but now you're going to know it's talking about the 144,000. Amplified Greek, but I'm going to read some of it in King James first. And they overcame him through the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. And when you amplify that into Greek, it says, and they, the 144,000, overcame Satan through their Christian constancy and courage. They kept themselves unharmed and spotless from their adversaries' schemes, temptations, and assaults because of the blood of Christ's atoning sacrifice, because they held fast to their testimony, and because they persevered steadfastly in bearing witness to it. That's huge. They didn't set their hearts on earthly advantages and joys, and they did not refuse to undergo even death. Therefore, rejoice, inhabitants of heaven, and woe to those who dwell upon the whole earth and sea. For the devil, the enemy of God and Christ, who estranges mankind from God by enticing them to sin, has been cast down to your dwelling place. And he is intensely and passionately angry, because he knows he only has a short time left in which to exercise his power, which has been granted him. If you catch that, which has been granted him. By who? By God. Because he's orchestrating this whole thing. Satan can only do what God empowers him or allows him to do. God is the puppet master. And when you can see the Revelation story like that, it's just like, take a deep breath. He's got this all under control. And when the devil saw that he was forcibly cast to the earth, he pursued the woman, Israel, which is what's going to happen in the future. When he gets cast down, he's going after Israel, not Michigan, not New York. He's going after Israel. He pursued the woman in a hostile manner, for she brought forth the male child, Jesus. And the woman, and now it switches to Christians in Israel again. The Christians in Israel were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the desert wilderness, into a place where she could dwell and be nourished, supported, and fed for a times, and half a times. And when you type that into the computer, what is that? It is 3.5 years, away from the sight or the presence of Satan. So here's future prophecy. It appears history is going to literally almost repeat itself. But didn't that sound a whole lot like the first part of chapter 12? Satan gets kicked out of heaven. He goes after the woman. The woman flees into a wilderness, and God protects and nourishes her for 3.5 years. 2 completely different events. And if preterists understood that, there would be no preterism. Because they think Revelation has already all happened. It was fulfilled in 70 AD. They're missing a key thing. History is going to repeat itself in the future. And there will be another war. It will be worse than the Jewish-Roman War. It will end with the destruction of Jerusalem. But it is a completely separate event. And that's what Revelation is about, the future event. All right, so the second part of chapter 12 is about the tribulation. Daniel 12:1, this is New Living Translation. At that time, Michael, the archangel who stands guard over your nations, will arise. And then there will be a time of anguish greater than any since the nations first came into existence. But at that time, every one of your people whose name is written in the book will be rescued. That means everybody who is a Christian, when the tribulation starts, because this is Archangel Michael who's going to battle Satan. He's going to kick him out of the throne room, and then he's going to stand guard over Israel during the tribulation. And it says, and every single Christian whose name is written in the book of life is going to be rescued. That's so comforting. History is going to repeat itself. And it says Christians are going to be given 2 wings of a great eagle. Now, I've heard people guess that the 2 wings of the great eagle is the United States, because we have the eagle on our coins. And we're going to go over there with Huey helicopters and Sherpas and C-130s, and we are going to rescue. No. People keep trying to bring the U.S. into this. And what we have to understand is the wings of an eagle is a metaphor for something else in the Bible. And there's verses that tell us what it stands for. So here's what's the wings of the eagle that are going to help rescue the Christians. You have to look in Exodus 19:4. This is New Living Translation. You have seen what I did to the Egyptians. You know how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. So this is God giving his divine aid to his people. Deuteronomy 32:11 and 12. This is New King James Version. As an eagle stirs up its nest, hovers over its young, spreading out its wings, taking them up, carrying them on its wings, so the Lord alone led him, and there was no foreign god with him. He's done it before. And in the tribulation, when it starts, he's going to do it again, just like he did during the Jewish-Roman War. When those Christians, when Cestius Gallus pulled back, they heeded the warnings of Matthew 23 and Matthew 24, which we'll find out wasn't a warning for them at all. But they didn't know that, and they just knew that there was some destruction coming on the generation that they were living in, and they fled, and every single one of them lived. That's amazing history. And to know that it's going to repeat itself gives those people over there comfort. They're going to know the signs, and I'm going to teach you what the signs are. They're going to know what they are, and then the ones that heed the warning will flee, and they were going to live through the tribulation. Do you guys remember the Church of Philadelphia? They were one of the 2 churches that God had nothing bad to say about. And these were the loving, obedient people. And he said to them in Revelation 3:10, because you have observed and waited patiently for my return from heaven, I will also keep you at a distance, guarding you and causing you to escape safely out of the power and the assaults of Satan, which will come upon the earth, and the period of time when I will inflict evils upon mankind in order to prove their character and steadfastness of faith. And some people use that as a pre-tribulation verse, saying he's going to take them out of the planet. But we learned that that doesn't mean he's going to rapture them before the tribulation starts. He says, I'm going to cause you to escape safely. I'm going to keep you at a distance. So it's just confirmation that Christians are going to be on the planet when the tribulation starts, and Christians are going to be in Israel when the tribulation starts. But those Christians that are aware of what to look for are going to flee. And they're the obedient, loving Christians. He says, I'm going to protect you. I'm going to hide you in the rock. And you're not going to perish. That's huge. The ones that stay behind are the 144,000, and we'll get into another group that might stay behind. So he's going to give them divine assistance and aid them in their escape. Revelation 12:15 through 17. And the devil cast out of his mouth. So this is what's going to happen when the women, when the woman, the Christians in Israel, recognize the tribulation has started and they begin to flee. This is what Satan's going to do. And the devil cast out of his mouth a river of water like a torrent after the woman, after the Christians that are fleeing, to cause her to be overwhelmed and drowned. And the earth helped the woman and opened its mouth and yawned and swallowed up the torrential river which was cast out of the devil's mouth. Now, I couldn't find what the river was. I don't know. I'm assuming it's water, but the river might be something else. Anyway, whatever it's coming after the Christians, it says the earth opens up and swallows up the river, and the woman doesn't get hurt by it. And he's done that before. He's literally opened up the earth before and swallowed up Korah and his whole group and then just closed it back up. So he's done that before. And the devil this is a key verse 17. And the devil was provoked to anger at the woman, the Christians who got away. Provoked to anger that his flood couldn't get them. And then it says, and he went away to make war with the rest of the Christians, which are your 144,000 who didn't flee, who were left, who observed the commandments of God, which were publicly declared by the Christian religion, and who also held fast to preserve the testimony of Jesus and his atoning sacrifice. They, the 144,000, were reconciled to God and granted eternal salvation. So when you just read chapter 12 in King James, and then you go back and read it in Amplified, and you see all the definitions put in, it'll make so much more sense to you what is happening. But it does confirm that there's going to be Christians in Israel at the onstart. But the ones that flee are going to be saved. They're going to be rescued from the flood. The 144,000 are called the remnant. They stay behind. They are going to be witnesses. They're going to fulfill God's purpose. They're going to hold fast to their faith. Satan is going to make war with them through the false prophet and the Antichrist. And they're going to end up laying down their lives for Christ. Not all Christians are going to flee. Now, they can, if they know their Bibles and they knew it was good for them, and they're going to know the signs. But not all Christians are going to flee. Some, for whatever reason, are going to stay behind. And it talks about them falling into deception and apostatizing. And there's warnings in the other books of the Bible that talk about this end times falling away. One of them is found in 2 Thessalonians 2:3. It's Amplified Greek. It says, let no man deceive you by any means. For the day of the Lord, the last day of this present age, when Christ will return from heaven, raise the dead, hold the final judgment, and perfect his kingdom, will not come except there be a falling away first, an apostasy from the true religion. And the man of sin who has contempt for the divine law, lives in iniquity, and denies the existence of God, makes his public appearance. The man who is destined for this thing, a man doomed to eternal misery, the Antichrist. So people that believe in pre-tribulation rapture, this verse clearly refutes that. It says that the day of the Lord, Christ's return from heaven, will not happen until two things happen first. The Antichrist is going to make his public appearance, and there's going to be a great falling away of Christians. Well, if they raptured everybody before the tribulation started, who's falling away? If all the Christians are gone off the planet, then who's falling away? There are Christians. This Bible does not teach pre-trib. And every verse that I was given to amplify only proved post-tribulation, pre-wrath rapture. They're going to be on the planet. Otherwise, who's God saving with the wings of a great eagle? The Christians who are fleeing, just like in the past when he saved the Christians who fled. Okay, so this apostasy. Why would people apostatize? How would people apostatize in the end times? How many of you were here for the letters to the 7 churches? Those letters are in here for a reason. Because some of those people that don't flee are going to fall into the trap of Ephesus, and they're going to lose their love for God's people, and in turn, they're going to lose their love for God. And he says, and I'm going to come down there and I'm going to remove your name from the list of churches altogether if you don't repent. But some of them are going to fall into that trap. Some are going to fall into the trap of Pergamos. They're going to spiritually and morally compromise themselves to the point where they bring a curse upon themselves. Some might fall into the trap of Thyatira, and they're going to basically be so deceived into thinking that it's okay to take the mark of the beast to survive, because God knows they don't want to. God knows they believe in him. Just like Thyatira with those guilds. They went to those guild meetings and did all the pagan stuff because that prophetess told them God would understand. Thyatira, some are going to take the mark because they're going to think it's not detrimental to them to side with both sides. Some are going to fall into the trap of Sardis. They're going to be so spiritually apathetic and negligent that sin's going to overtake them. And they're not even going to know they've been overtaken. And it says, and God's going to blot their name out of the book. They're the red ones. Some might fall into the trap of the church of the Laodiceans and be lukewarm and lost. The Laodicean church was wealthy. They didn't think they needed God. So these people might fare very well during the tribulation over there and think that they don't need God. But when they stood before God, the church of Laodiceans, he said, I'm going to spew you out of my mouth, which means I'm going to reject you with extreme disgust. You say you didn't need me. You weren't even saved. You weren't even, in my book, saved. So you've got those 5 groups of people, the great falling away. Those are the different warnings. But then you have 2 churches that God didn't have anything bad to say about. The Church of Philadelphia, he says, I'm going to rescue you. Well, there's your Christians that flee. There's your obedient Christians, the other people group. The Christians that actually heed the warnings and leave. He says, I will hide you in the rock. And some people, scholars, believe that the Christians are going to flee to Petra, Jordan. And God's going to hide them in the rock. That's speculation, but it's pretty cool if that's where they go. And then the last church was the church of Smyrna. Well, if you remember that church, they were the persecuted church. So there's your 144,000. The other people group that's going to be recognized in the tribulation are those Christians who lay it down, the persecuted church, who will lay down their lives. And he's got a great reward promised for them. Hang in there. The time is short. Hang in there. It will be worth it. So you've got all the different things addressed. That's why the letters to the 7 churches are so important to this book of Revelation. Some people teach, oh, those letters don't have anything to do with, the church isn't mentioned again after chapter 3. And I'm like, well, not directly, but yes, in a roundabout way, they're mentioned a ton of times. The word church might not be used, but the believers are addressed many times in this book after chapter 3. So, selfishly, here's what comforts me. And it'll probably comfort all of you too. And it makes people not be scared of the book of Revelation. It's the tribulation is going to originate in the Middle East. The Antichrist is going to rule in the Middle East. The trumpet judgments are going to sound in the Middle East. The mark of the beast and the rules that the Antichrist enforces are going to be centered in the Middle East, not in the United States. We're not going to be in the heart of it. So that brings comfort to a lot of people. Further bringing comfort is Jesus' promise to protect the Christians that are over there if they flee. The ones that don't, they're either the 144,000 or the ones that are going to apostatize. But he promises to save the ones that flee. So this is why preterists are so confused with chapter 12. They think John is describing the same event 2 different ways, when actually John is describing 2 different, completely different events in very similar ways. The events are very similar. The events within the tribulation and the events of the Jewish-Roman War, very similar. Not the same event at all. So when Satan gets evicted from the throne room for good, he's going to set to work immediately. He's going to be infuriated. He's going after Israel. He has a short time left. So I believe this is the trigger point to the 3.5-year tribulation. Because the first thing that happens in the next chapter is we meet the Antichrist and the false prophet, who Satan gives his power to. So it just makes sense that the flow of events. Now, there's some of the newer translations actually have an 18th verse in Revelation chapter 12. In Revelation 12, they have 18. And it says, and Satan took his stand on the shore of the sea, or the dragon. Most translations, the older ones, don't have a verse 18. They take that verse and they move it to chapter 13, verse 1. But then they don't say it was the dragon standing on the shore of the sea. They say it was John. So it was just really kind of confusing as to why these translations were. Regardless of who's standing on the shore of the sea, we are now getting into the Antichrist and the false prophet. And John is still on the island of Patmos getting this vision. So I'm going to read a verse from 12, and then we're going to jump right into chapter 13. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth, for the devil has been cast down to your dwelling place, and he is intensely and passionately angry, because he knows he only has a short time left in which to exercise his power, which has been granted him. Here's what he's going to do first. Revelation 13, 1 through 5, in Amplified Greek. And I, John, and I've got the symbols in paragraph in your parentheses again. And I, John, stood upon the sand overlooking the sea. That means the wild and restless condition of the nations. And I saw in my vision a beast, which stands for the Antichrist, his kingdom, and his power, rise up out of the sea, the bottomless pit of hell. Having 7 heads, now this is so important. This 7-headed beast, everybody's wanted this dragon with 7 heads. What do the 7 heads represent? Series of 7 Roman emperors, past and future. So the 7-headed beast is Roman emperors, past and future. And it had 10 horns, and that stood for 10 national rulers who are not in power yet until the beast gives them rule for a short period of time. And upon these 10 national rulers' heads were 10 crowns, which were kingly ornaments like diadems. The 7 heads, which are the 7 Roman rulers, both past and future, all blasphemed God with irreverent and reproachful speech, which was injurious to God's divine majesty. And the beast's imperial kingdom and his power, which was the revived Roman Empire, which I also saw in my vision, was like a leopard, which moved swiftly and sprung suddenly. And its followers were like the followers of a bear. Its mouth, which was the destructive policies of these 2 world rulers, was like the jaws of a lion. And the dragon, Satan, gave his power to the beast, the Antichrist. He also gave him his seat, which stands for headship of the final federal revived Roman Empire. And great authority. He gave him great physical and mental powers. And I saw one of the 7 heads, one of the 7 rulers, both past and future, of the Roman Empire, as it were, wounded to death, and it's killed by a sword stroke. And his deadly wound, his mortal wound, was healed. He comes back to life from a deadly sword wound. And all of the world followed the beast, the Antichrist, in wonder. And they worshipped the dragon, Satan, which gave his power to the beast, the Antichrist. And they vowed allegiance to the Antichrist, saying, who is equal in strength to him? Who is able to make war against him? And there was given unto the Antichrist the ability to speak great things and blasphemies against God's divine character. Power was given him to continue in his position for 42 months. The Antichrist has rule of a revived Roman empire for 42 months. Okay, so below in your notes, I have a list of different things that we can look for that are going to identify to us, when it happens over there, who the Antichrist is going to be. Number 1, he's going to be a past Roman emperor or a future Roman ruler. Now, we don't have emperors anymore. We have popes. Now, I know that the Catholics are going to be like, aghast. Okay, take a breath. I'm going to explain later that you don't have anything to worry about if you're a Roman Catholic. But he's going to be Roman, and he's either going to be a past Roman ruler. Well, he's going to be a past Roman ruler. Just saying that right now. Okay. He will have been killed by a sword stroke. So whoever this past Roman ruler is, he's going to be dead right before the tribulation starts. He'll be dead, and he will have been killed by a sword stroke. Number 3, when he resurrects from the pit of hell, he's going to put 10 rulers of 10 countries into power under his authority, kind of like a United Nations kind of thing. And it's going to be the revived Roman Empire. And if you study the Roman Empire back then, it covered over 2 million square miles. 55 million people were under the control of one man, and that was the Roman emperor that was in control. So this Antichrist is going to revive a similar Roman Empire with 10 countries, 10 kings that he's going to put into position. And it says they're going to spring up quickly like a leopard. So it's going to happen fast when he comes into play. Let's see, Satan, number 5, Satan's going to give his power to the Antichrist, and he's going to be able to do miracles. And the world is going to be in awe of this guy because he once lived, and then he didn't, and now he lives again. Who can make war against him? Dudes come back from the dead. And number 6, he's going to continue as leader of this revived Roman Empire for 42 months, which is 3.5 years. Okay, so there's so much information about him, and that's not even all. We're going to get more and more and more about this guy, that if we screw this up, there's no excuse to not know who the Antichrist is going to be. None. And when we get through chapter 17, it pretty much spells it out. So hang in there with me till then. Catholics, peace of mind, it's not a future pope. It will be a past Roman emperor. And some people are like, okay, that's so sci-fi. Okay, we don't have a problem with God bringing down Moses and Elijah, or Elijah and Enoch to be the 2 witnesses who can breathe fire out of their mouth, but yet we have a problem with God resurrecting a past Roman emperor up to be the Antichrist. He's in control of all of it. He's in control of this whole thing. So, but here's something to contemplate. It says that he's going to be in his position for 42 months. That is 3.5 years, not 7. So every teaching, how many of you guys, raise your hand if you are familiar with the 7-year tribulation? You've heard somebody teach on a 7-year tribulation. Just teach on it. Okay. How many of you have ever heard that at the beginning of the 7-year tribulation, there's going to be a peace treaty signed? You've heard somebody teach that to you. Okay. Most everybody. Okay. And then in the middle of that 7 years, he's going to break that peace treaty with Israel, and he's going to set himself up as God in the throne. He's going to enforce the mark of the beast, and the last 3.5 years are going to be hell on earth because he's going to be in control at that point, right? Okay. How is that possible if this Bible just said he is going to continue in his position for only 42 months? If he was going to be in position for 7 years, that verse would have said he's going to be in control for 84 months, not 42. And we have still yet to come across 3.5 years of peace or a peace treaty being signed. So I'm going to prep you guys right now. Be listening for it. Because as of yet, the only thing that we have heard over and over and over is that this tribulation is going to be 3.5 years long. The 2 witnesses are going to be on the planet for 1,260 days. That's 3.5 years. And now the Antichrist is going to be in position for 42 months. That's 3.5 years. A time times and half a times is how long the woman's going to be protected that flees. That's 3.5 years. So he's literally said 3.5 years about 4 different ways. But yet we keep teaching it 7 years long. We'll get to the bottom of it, I promise. I promise you. All right, so we're going to find out a little bit more about the Antichrist. Revelation 13, 6 through 9. And the Antichrist opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, against his name, against heaven and all who dwelt there. And it was given unto him the ability to make war with the saints. Okay, I don't see peace here. War. With the saints who are Christians, the 144,000, to overcome them by force. He was given the power to hold under submission to his will every race of people, of every language, and every nation. And all who lived on the earth, whose names were not written in the book of the Lamb, who was slain before the foundation of the world, worshipped the Antichrist. If any man has an ear, let him hear and understand. If your name is in the book of life, you're not going to worship this dude. You don't have anything to worry about. You're going to know who he is, and you're not going to do it. It states very clearly, when Christ returns in the clouds, He's going to lead captivity captive. He's going to take the bride from the earth into the clouds. Then he's going to, with his sword of his mouth, punish the wicked. And then he's going to go back up into the throne room with his bride, and he's going to acknowledge those 144,000 in a special ceremony that we're going to get into later. And he's going to give them a very great reward for what they did. He calls them the patience of the saints. And when you get into chapter 13, verse 10, it talks about those three things in order in kind of covert language. But if you've been through my class, you're going to understand. He's talking about the order of events. Revelation 13:10, Amplified Greek. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He is Jesus that leadeth people into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with the sword, the wicked people, will be killed with the sword of Jesus' mouth. And then it says, here's the patience and the faith of the saints. He's acknowledging the 144,000. That verse was so confusing to me. I'm just like, what is that? But when I understood what he that leadeth in captivity shall go into captivity means, the word go, hupago, literally it says, shall go, hupago. It says to depart from earth to the Father in heaven is used of Jesus with the accusative of a place. In Ephesians 4:8, when it says he led captivity captive and he gave gifts unto men, that was when he ascended after his crucifixion, and he took some of the people from paradise with him. It says he led captivity captive. And I told you, when the time comes for the rapture of the bride, he's going to do that same thing on a bigger scale. And that's exactly what this verse is talking about. He's going to rapture the bride and lead in a triumphant procession. He's going to recapture his bride. He's going to take her into the Father's house with him. So the Antichrist is going to be a past Roman ruler. He's going to rise from the pit of hell, which means when he was in charge, he was not a Christ follower. He wasn't a believer, because he's coming up from hell. In chapter 17, when we get into more about him, it literally says who he is. Believe it or not, the lexicon gives a name. I was shocked, but it does. So that's what I'm going to teach you, because we're doing Revelation exegesis style, which means we're pulling from the lexicons. So that's what I'm going to give you. He's going to be in power for 3.5 years. He's symbolized by the rider on the red horse with a sword. He makes war, not peace. Revelation 13:11. And then I saw another Antichrist ruler. He doesn't work alone. The false prophet coming up out of the earth, who along with the first is destined to control the affairs of the nations with satanic power. Let's see. And he had 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon. And for time's sake, I'm going to go quickly through this. He had 2 horns like a lamb. Okay, lambs don't have horns. They have nubs. He spoke like a dragon or a serpent. So we got like a horned serpent looking kind of, he doesn't look like it, but he acts like that. He's going to speak very eloquently. He's going to get people to like him, like a lamb. But he is the dragon. He is Satan. And so when I look up the word lamb in the Vine's Expository Dictionary, it says, the Greek word is arnion. And it says, in the description of the second beast, the false prophet in Revelation 13:11, seen in this vision like a lamb, suggestive of his acting in the capacity of a false Messiah, a travesty of the true. So he's going to get people to follow him because he's going to be very eloquent. And it says he comes up from the earth, not the pit. So although the Antichrist is going to be resurrected from the dead, easy to spot, he will have been killed by a sword, the false prophet is going to come up from the earth. He's going to probably be already in position. People are going to know who he is. He's going to instantly team up with the Antichrist, and he's going to be his his spokesperson. He's going to promote him. And we'll find out more about what he does. This false prophet is just as powerful, literally. Like the stuff he does is just as much as the Antichrist. But he's a horned serpent. Now, when I was studying the 144,000, if you guys remember, there was 144 and 12,000 were from each of the 12 tribes, except for one son. One of Jacob's 12 sons didn't make the cut, and his name was Dan. And I looked up everything I could about why Dan would have gotten excluded. Okay, what I found was most interesting. Dan has 2 tribal emblems. One of them is the scales, which is what the rider on the black horse carries, which I told you is the false prophet. The other tribal emblem of Dan is a nubbed-headed snake, a horned serpent. So it is possible that Dan is excluded from being part of the 144,000 because from his tribe might be the false prophet. Speculation, very, very suspect that the rider on the black horse has the scales, and it's the tribe of Dan's emblems are both the things that they describe the false prophet as. In Genesis 49:17, New King James Version, it says, Dan shall be a serpent by the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heel so that the rider shall fall backwards. So anyway, just a thought. We're not going to know who's from the tribe of who, but Jesus knows. Revelation 13:12 through 15. This is more about the false prophet. He exercised all the power and gave exhibitions of his power like the first Antichrist before him, and caused the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first Antichrist, whose deadly wound was healed. He doeth great wonders and miracles under the power of Satan, by which men are deceived, so that he makes fire come down from the sky to the earth in the sight of them. And he deceived them who dwelled on the earth by means of those miracles, which he had the ability to do under the power and the authority of the first Antichrist. And he said to those who dwelled on the earth, we should make a statue of the Antichrist, who was killed by a sword wound but has come back to life. And he had the power to give the spirit of life to the statue of the beast, and gave the statue the power not only to speak, but ordered that anyone who would not worship the statue of the first Antichrist should be killed. Okay, we're going to know who this dude is. He's going to be the one that fabricates the statue, puts it in the holy place, demands it to be worshipped, enforces the mark of the beast, which we'll find out later. We're going to know who the false prophet is because we're going to know who the Antichrist is. So we're not going to be tricked. So I've listed some of the ways to identify the false prophet. I'll read them really quickly. He's going to be somebody living when the Antichrist makes his public appearance from the pit of hell. And he's going to team up with him. He's going to be deceptive and eloquent with his words. He's going to be empowered by Satan, just like the Antichrist, to do miracles. He's going to have a statue made of the Antichrist. He's going to give the statue the ability to speak. He's going to order the people to worship the statue or be killed. And he's going to place the statue in the holy place of the rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. This act is referred to as the abomination of desolation, and it's been spoken of by many prophets. I'm going to read Matthew 24 really quickly. This is Jesus talking to his disciples about the end times. Now, his disciples thought he was talking to them about the first destruction of Jerusalem, because he had just finished in Matthew 23 scolding the Pharisees. When he gets into chapter 24, he switches gears on the disciples and doesn't tell them, and he starts talking about end times stuff. It's a whole nother teaching I'm going to teach later called Clearing the Confusion. But Matthew 24, here he is talking about this statue that's going to go in the holy place, right, when the tribulation starts. This is Matthew 24, 15 through 22, New Living Translation. The day is coming when you will see what Daniel the prophet spoke about, the sacrilegious object that causes desecration standing in the holy place. Reader, pay attention. Then those in Judea must flee to the hills. A person out on the deck of the roof must not go down into the house to pack. Person out in the field must not return even to get a coat. How terrible we will be for pregnant women and for nursing mothers in those days. And pray that your flight will not be in winter or on the Sabbath, for there will be greater anguish than at any time since the world began, and it will never be so great again. In fact, unless that time of calamity is shortened, not a single person will survive, but it will be shortened for the sake of God's chosen ones. We're going to know when the tribulation starts, guys. Once we see the Antichrist make his public appearance, we have 42 months, 3.5 years. And one of the first things that's going to happen is there's going to be a statue erected of him and put in the temple in Jerusalem. That's why I said, if the temple starts getting built, okay, it could stand for 80 years before there's a statue put in it. But when that statue goes in it, that means the Antichrist is on the planet. And we're going to know we've got 42 months. That's all he has. So the tribulation is 3.5 years long. And now that we know that we don't go up before, we can know the season of his return. That's comforting to me, because that means that there's going to be a slew of Christians whose eyes are open, and there's going to be a lot of people, I believe, over here that are going to be repenting. The tribulation is not the wrath of God, guys. The tribulation is a wake-up call to the church and a call to salvation for the lost. And when you knew you had 42 months left in your life, you would be talking to your relatives that you've been avoiding. You'd be like sharing this book because the time is at hand. Now, that doesn't mean we just fluff off because we know we're not in it. And that's a lot of people are like, till I see that, I'm not even going to worry. Okay, this book is here for a purpose. And so I'm going to teach you what it says so that at least when we are in it, you'll know it and you won't fall for everybody going, we're in it now. No, we're not. There is no statue of the Antichrist. Antichrist hasn't made his public appearance. There's no rebuilt temple. We're not in it. But when we are, you're looking for 2 witnesses that can breathe fire. They've got 1,260 days. You're looking for a dude that came back from the pit of hell, who was a Roman emperor, who was killed with the sword stroke. And they're going to make a statue of him and put it in the holy place. We're going to know. We're going to know. And people in Judea need to flee, not people in Fort Lauderdale. Once more confirming it's over there. All of it happens over there. So, the Antichrist and the false prophet are going to get 10 countries to team up with them. I will say this. If we are not one of those 10 countries, we're not going to be in the heart of any of it. The only way that the United States can be brought into this is if we side with Rome. And if we have a president like we do now who sides with Israel, we're golden. But if we have a future president who actually aligns himself with Rome when this goes down and becomes one of the 10 crowns, then we're going to be under the mark of the beast. We're going to be under the rules. We're not under the rules of people over there. We're not under Saudi's rules. We're not under North Korea's rules. We're under the United States rules, and nothing will change if we don't go under somebody else's rules. Does that make sense? Okay. So if we side with Israel, that's why I'm like, I'm with Israel. Till I die, I'm with Israel, his chosen people. Revelation 13, 16 through 18, Amplified Greek. And he, the false prophet, caused all, both small and great, rich and poor, free or slave, to receive a mark, stamped on their foreheads or on their right hands, as a badge symbolizing that they were followers of the Antichrist. And no one could buy or sell anything without the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number whose letters indicate his name. Here's an opportunity to use wisdom in discovering the meaning of the mysterious number in the vision. Let the one with that understanding explain by computing the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. The number is 666. So when I looked up the word mark, haragma in the Greek, it says it is the mark stamped on the forehead or on the right hand, so that's literal, as a badge of the followers of Antichrist. So you're going to know, they're going to know what they're doing when they take it. It's not going to be a trick. And the beast, the Greek word is therion, and it says, in the sense of wild beast, it is used in the apocalypse for the 2 anti-Christian rulers who are destined to control the affairs of the nations with satanic power in the closing period of the present age. So the beast sometimes can be the Antichrist, sometimes the beast can be the false prophet, sometimes the beast can be his kingdom and his power. It's a beast. So 3 different ways the word beast is used in the book of Revelation. It isn't always just the Antichrist person. Sometimes it's his kingdom and his rule. So we have to understand that there's so many borrowed and passed down teachings of the book of Revelation, and you guys are getting an eye-opening exegesis-style teaching. Eisegesis is where I think, and I'm going to put my interpretation into it, and you get a lot of that. And a lot of you guys have sat under a Revelation teaching that's eisegesis. This is exegesis, which means we're pulling straight from the Bible only and from the lexicons only. So when you hear from now on at the end of this teaching, you're going to know when somebody starts teaching something, whether it's in the Bible or not. Because we're going to cover over 500 verses from all over the Bible. You're going to know what's in the Bible and what's not in the Bible. So that's one comforting thing to you. You're going to be red flagging people on TV all the time. You're like, oh, nope. That's not in there. So just make it through this class. You're going to learn so much about this book. The cool thing is that chapter 12, it was past prophecy. It took us to the trigger point of the whole tribulation in the beginning. There's a battle that's going to trigger this tribulation. It's a battle in heaven when Satan gets evicted. Chapter 14 at the end, we're going to get a glimpse beyond the tribulation, beyond the return of Christ, to another epic battle that's going to end it all. So we're going to get now we're moving not only details within the 3.5 years, we're getting a little glimpse of the before and the after the tribulation starts. So you guys be ready for chapter 14. Okay, so we have just a few minutes. If anybody has any questions regarding these 2 chapters, raise your hand. We've got a microphone that we can pass around.
I just wanted to clarify, when you were talking about the woman being Israel and then women Christians in Israel, is that in blue letter Bible, or how did you?
That's a good point. Okay, so what I've done for you is, because we know the history of the past Jewish-Roman war, we know that when Satan went after Israel, he went after all of Israel. But the only people that fled, the woman that fled into the wilderness that God protected, were the Christians. So I put that in there just as an aid to you guys, that not all of Israel got saved during the Jewish-Roman war. Only the Christians got saved. Still part of Israel, Christians in Israel, but only the Christians were saved. So when we get into the second part, he goes after the country of Israel again, but the only people that are going to flee are the Christians that heed the warnings. And he's promised the obedient church, the Christians, that he will protect them. So no, you're right. That's, the Christians is not part of that definition, but I put it in there because that is actually what group in Israel is going to be saved. There's going to be a lot of Jewish, Orthodox Jewish people that are going to die during the tribulation that don't flee. And there's going to be Christians that apostatize, that don't flee, that are actually not going to make it through the tribulation as well. But he promises the Christians that flee protection. And also Pella, that one part that it says they fled into the wilderness, I just put Pella in there because I knew where they fled, because that's past history. I had to do research to find that. It was a lot of weeks of research to find out what that was talking about. So some of those are just aids, but most of them are actual definitions, yes. Not all of Israel is going to flee, but in both instances, the past Jewish war, the only people that fled were the Christians. Okay. They fled from Israel. They were considered, I guess, they would be like Messianic Jews. Jewish people that converted to Christian, but there's a lot of Gentile Christians that lived in Israel too at that time that escaped. So that's why I put all the Christians in. I didn't just specify it's only the Jewish Christians. All the Christians fled because they knew the word. And in the future tribulation, he's going to go after Israel as a people. But Christians that flee are the woman that he's talking about. He's going to send a flood after them. He's going to save the Christians that flee Israel again. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. History really does repeat itself with the tribulation. There's going to be a lot of similarities to the Jewish-Roman war. Did you guys learn anything tonight? Yes? It's a lot of information. All right. So I'm going to say a blessing over you guys and pray you out, and you're going to be free to go. We will see you back here next week for chapter 14 and 15. Yes?